Shalom, and welcome back to another episode of Ezra International's It's All About the Aliyah. For over 25 years, Ezra International has been helping the poorest of the poor Jewish people make it home to the land of Israel, the land of their biblical destiny. Hi, I'm your host, Gary Cristofaro, and today I've decided to focus on a country profile. I think this is a great way of sharing with you current events as well as a little bit about all the countries that we're working in. You know, we work in over 17 nations. I say over because officially we're in 17, and then from time to time we're called to help out in a country here or there. And some we don't speak a lot about because of security reasons, but we are out there helping Jewish people wherever we're called to help. So let's get started. Let's talk about the nations, first of all. Why is it that we are working in so many different nations regarding helping the Jewish people get home to Israel? If we start all the way back where we are first told in Deuteronomy chapter 4, we're first told of this result, this promise of God that Jewish people would be scattered in the nations due to disobedience. And we're told in Deuteronomy chapter 4, starting in verse 26, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that you will soon utterly perish from the land which you cross over the Jordan to possess. You will not prolong your days in it, but will utterly be destroyed. And the Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where the Lord will drive you. Now, isn't that amazing that before the Israelites stepped 1 foot in the land of promise, in the Eretz Israel, in the land of Canaan, as it was known at the time, they were told by God through Moses that they would be scattered into the nations. This was a promise made by God that this would happen if they disobeyed his Torah. And then yet we're reminded still all the way back in Deuteronomy, I'm in chapter 30 now, that he would regather them thanks to the promise he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Verse 4 of chapter 30, if any of you are driven out to the farthest parts under heaven, from there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will bring you. Then the Lord your God will bring you to the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. He will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. That is a beautiful promise that is made in the book of Deuteronomy to the Jewish people, or the Israelites, as they were then known, or Hebrews, before they ever made it into the land. They were told it was going to happen. They would be scattered. They were also comforted that their people would come back. And we're told of this again and again by all of the prophets. God warns his people, if you disobey me, you'll be scattered, but I will bring you back thanks to the promise I made to your forefathers. So we're going to talk today about some of those who were scattered and landed in Argentina. You might say, Argentina? Really? Yes, there is a Jewish population in Argentina. I know that when you think of Jewish people outside the land of Israel, first thing that comes to mind might be New York or Miami or maybe Russia, Ukraine. These are places that our minds connect with Russian populations. But yes, Argentina, and we're going to talk about how that all happened. But first, remember the promise of Scripture. Isaiah 43 verse 6 says, I will say to the north, give them up, and say to the south, do not keep them back. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Isaiah 43 verse 6. And Isaiah 11:12 says, he will set up a banner to the nations and will assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather the dispersed from Judah from the four corners of the earth. You see, it's not limited to Russia or the United States, but the four corners of the earth. That's what God promised, and that's where his people have gone, and this is the promise that they would come back from wherever they were scattered. Isaiah 11:11 says, I will bring them back a second time. And so you're seeing, once again, the Aliyah, the return of the Jewish people that we're experiencing in our day, is the second regathering after the second dispersion. All right, so Argentina, the South American country with the sun in its flag, and it's home to 44 million people. Of these 44 million, only a mere 4.9 million are evangelical Christians. Now, why do I mention that? It's because it's been the evangelical world that has been helping Jewish people now for the last, say, 30, maybe 40 years. And again, that is a small remnant of the evangelical world, and the evangelical world is a smaller remnant of the larger Christian world when you think about it. But there are 180,300 Jewish people making Argentina their home. And of course, they all speak Spanish, or the vast majority of them do. The majority of these Jewish people moved from Central and Eastern Europe, about 70%. And the remaining 30% moved from the areas around the Mediterranean Sea. We're finding Jewish people from Spain, Portugal, Morocco, North Africa, Syria, and Turkey. And think about this for a moment. When I say we're finding them in Argentina, from these countries, well, they originated in Israel. But what happens and historically, this bears up, what happened is Jewish people were dispersed from the land of Israel, first in the Babylonian captivity and then later when the Romans destroyed Israel. But they would move on to a place of temporary refuge. I say temporary because there are many places that the Jewish people found moments of safety, moments of acceptance. It was a place of refuge, but inevitably the population would turn on them. Anti-Semitism, war, economic collapse, something would happen, and the Jewish people would take the brunt, and they would move on. There would be an expulsion from that land, and they would move on to another land. In this case, when we're talking about Argentina, we're talking about a lot of those who came from Spain. Now, you're all probably familiar with the famous rhyme, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But did you realize that also in 1492, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella expelled every Jew? Maybe the rhyme wouldn't have been as popular had we taught it that way, but this is what happened. Many fled to the New World, coming from Spain. Now, it's a little known fact, but did you know that many people believe that Columbus was taking Jewish people out of Spain when he sailed to the New World? It's even believed that Columbus himself had a Jewish background. Now, there is some evidence to back this up. That's not the topic of this program today, but it may be an interesting topic to look into. In fact, some say that Columbus's last name was Cologne, and he wrote with Hebrew in some of his letters, and it makes for an interesting theory that he was secretly getting Jewish people out of the Spanish Inquisition. All right, so some escaped to Argentina, as I said, and the Argentinian communities, Jewish communities, can trace their roots back to the Spanish Inquisition, the expulsion from Spain. But the communities officially were not founded until after Argentina gained its independence from Spain. All right, so by the mid-century, by the middle of the 1800s, Jews had also come to Argentina from France, from other European countries, escaping revolution, escaping pogroms, and they were drawn to Argentina largely because of its cosmopolitan feel, more so than the other South American countries. In fact, by the beginning of the last century, Argentina had the thriving economy and the highest standard of living in that portion of the world. They had wheat, oil, meat products, and Buenos Aires was known as the Paris of Latin America. So this became a place of refuge for the Jewish people. It was a thriving community, thriving country at the time. But as things go, there's this full circle effect that happens. And since Israel became a nation in 1948, roughly about 70,000 Jewish people made their way back to Israel from Argentina. And each year, hundreds of Jewish people make it back to Israel from Argentina. Now, there have been spikes. I've talked to you in previous episodes about waves of Aliyah. There have been spikes from Argentina, once in 1963, another time 10 years later in 1973, and then again in 2002. And we're seeing something today that will probably exceed 2002, but we'll get to that in a moment. But why these spikes? Why are these waves of Aliyah? You know, I've talked to you again in previous episodes about the push and the pull factor. You know, for Jewish people, the pull factor, I believe, is that homing pigeon spirit, so to speak, that as God awakens something inside a Jewish person, it says it's time to go home. And many Jewish people will do that. They will go home based on a spiritual calling, something that calls them to the land, their land of their fathers and their homeland, and they go on their own accord. But then there are those others who are subject to a push factor, which could be something like war or economic turmoil, or in the case of the Spanish Inquisition, something much more serious where they need to go or potentially die. Now, I interviewed many Jewish people in 2014 that came out of Ukraine, Donbass region, the war that broke out on the eastern border. And they told me, to a person, they told me they were not planning to leave Ukraine. It was all they ever knew until, and that until was the war. The war changed everything. They lost everything and they were hopeless. And their only hope was to go to Israel. And they did. Many did. So this is what I say. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about push and pull factors and war and economic turmoil, anti-Semitism. All these things are push factors and they cause Jewish people to go home. So what was it in Argentina that caused these waves of Aliyah? Well, just as Argentina became a refuge for Jewish people escaping persecution, ironically, Argentina also became a refuge for Nazis fleeing prosecution. And so in 1960, I believe it was, Adolf Eichmann was found by the Mossad, the Jewish secret police organization. They found him, and if you remember, Adolf Eichmann was the mastermind behind the ghetto operation, gathering Jewish people up into the ghettos, and then later he was the mastermind in getting Jewish people to the extermination camps. So this was a man who was sought by the Israeli authorities, was found in 1960 and put on trial. And you know, he never denied the atrocities that he committed. He only said, I was following orders. I'm just following orders. That was his only defense. And he was given the death penalty and hung for his crimes. But this type of activity, the Jews in Argentina became targets of anti-Semitism, partly because of the Eichmann incident, partly because it coincided with a coup that happened in 1962. The Eichmann trial, the anti-Semitism, government unrest, these were push factors that caused the Aliyah to spike from Argentina in 1963. The wave of Aliyah from in 1973 really was related to the similar causes, the government upheaval and the all too familiar anti-Semitism that comes with it. So that explains 63 and 73. Then you have later in 1976 through 1983, the military junta or coup that happened, and 1,000 of the 9,000 people that were killed were in Argentina were Jewish. They were killed by the state. And so once again, the 1980s became tumultuous for the Jewish people. And at that time, there were 250,000 Jews living in Argentina. But due to political oppression and anti-Semitic outbursts, they left. They left Israel. Some even made their way to the United States. They left for Israel, and some made their way to the United States. So we're going to continue this in just a moment. I think it's a good time right here to pause for a commercial break. And when we come back, we'll continue on the history of the Jewish population in Argentina. We'll be right back.
See, I will bring them from the land of the north and gather them from the ends of the earth. Among them will be the blind and the lame, expectant mothers and women in labor. A great throng will return. Jeremiah 31:8.
Ezra International has helped thousands, like Olim the blind from Ukraine and Giergu from Hungary. Little Vadim, who is going blind, is now getting the help he needs in Israel, thanks to Ezra International. Jewish families around the world hear the call to return to their homeland. Their prophets foretold long ago that the return to Israel in our time would be a miracle, and it is greater even than the exodus from Egypt under Moses. The prophets also foretold another calling for our time, to the Gentiles, to those of us from among the nations. It is a call that Ezra International responds to each and every day by providing humanitarian aid to impoverished Jewish families. You can answer that call too. A gift of only $30 per month for a year can help Ezra International and return a poor Jewish person, restoring them to the land of their promise. Call the number below or visit EzraInternational.org and give your gift of hope today.
Okay, before the break, we were talking about the Jewish people leaving Argentina because of unrest. And that unrest continued into the 90s and all the way to the turn of the century. The Israeli embassy was bombed in 1992, killing 32 people. And in 1994, the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires was bombed, killing more than 100 people and wounding over 200. These attacks were thought to be carried out by Iran with the assistance of the Argentine police, which made the situation even more scary and difficult. So you see, Argentina was a refuge for the Jewish people for a time. But like country after country after country, things change. And when they do, it seems that the Jewish people always take the brunt, take the blame for the unrest. You know, by the turn of the century, as I was saying, around the year 2000 and a few years after, we see the stability of the Jewish people and the country collapse. There were around 200,000 Jewish people still left. About 50,000 had left previously in the other Aliyah, waves of Aliyah. And these 200,000 people who had wealth and standing almost immediately became impoverished by the economic turmoil that rose and the anti-Semitism. As a result, the Jewish Agency was working double shifts trying to get Jewish people out of the country. At that time, the Aliyah skyrocketed to about 6,000 who left in 2002. And this was due to the chaos, confusion, unemployment, poverty, rioting, destruction, and the government clashes all led to many Jewish people wanting to leave. As I said, up to almost 6,000 tried to leave at the time. So the Jewish Agency couldn't handle the load. and they called upon Ezra International. They were overwhelmed. And, as I said earlier, they were working double shifts, 2 8-hour shifts, and they couldn't handle the load. And they knew that Ezra International could be of assistance to them. So in 2002, they called Mel Hosel, our founder. The middle picture here, Mel, was called, and along with him came Michael Utterbach, the man in the lower picture, and Pat Frame, you'll find in the upper corner. They went to Buenos Aires in February of that year to see if they could sort out what they could do, what were the needs, and what we could do, and start making plans. When Pat arrived, Pat Frame, you may know that name because I've been advertising her book. We'll talk about that at the end once again. Pat Frame noticed something very unusual about Argentina. So she had worked a lot in Ukraine and other countries. And there she witnessed people scavenging through garbage cans for food. It was not that unusual in the former Soviet Union. But here in Argentina, she was seeing the same thing, but these people who were doing it, the Jewish population especially, dressed in fine clothes. They had money in the bank, but they couldn't get the money out, and they couldn't get money for food. So here they were scavenging through the garbage cans for food, dressed in their finest clothes. The pastors in Argentina were having a hard time dealing with it. They were used to sending money to foreign missions, and now they were looking for assistance for themselves and for their own churches. But all in all, this made the pastors of that region very open to the message that the Ezra contingency brought. As Mel and Michael and Pat met with them, they were very open to hear what Ezra was doing and why. Now, once again, this meeting that they were called to became very interesting. As you see again in the pictures, Pat, Mel, and Michael went to meet with the head of the Jewish agency in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. And he had just moved there due to this influx or this great demand for Aliyah. He moved there from Kiev, or Kiev, as it's more properly pronounced. Kiev was used to handling many Jewish people leaving at one time. Buenos Aires was not. And so this man had just come down from Ukraine, and when he went to meet with Michael and Mel and Pat, he didn't realize that Pat was there. And the first thing he did when he opened the door was, "Pat, what are you doing here?" And he recognized her from all the times that they worked together. And of course, Ezra benefited greatly by this relationship because this man trusted Pat, trusted the work that she had done, and she would come on board with Ezra International shortly thereafter. So this benefited the meeting greatly. This helped kick us off to a great start, and they began planning to move as many of the Jewish people out as possible with the help of Ezra International. Now, one of the things that he told us that was very interesting and made Argentina very unique was that there were a lot of Jewish people who had returned to Argentina from Israel. In other words, they had made Aliyah once, but because of a family situation, a dynamic that was unique it seemed to Argentina, many of those who left for Israel left, and they stayed in Israel for a little while and then came back. And this presented a problem for the Jewish agency because they were not allowed to pay for a Jewish person returning to Israel. They were only allowed to pay for flights for those who were going for the first time. And so here I have the brochure. I want to share with you a little bit of a little story regarding this, because one of those families that had returned from Israel and made it back to Argentina and now wanted to leave was a couple with a girl. Now, it wasn't the whole family wasn't going to return because the family was experiencing abuse. The wife and daughter were experiencing abuse from the father and husband. He had become violent, He was abusive. So the mother and the young girl needed to leave. They needed to go home to Israel in order to escape this situation. When our team heard this, Michael Lauterbach was the first to say, we will pay for their flights. And the reason I bring this up, because this story stands out in our Ezra history, because that young girl is this young girl that ended up on our brochure. Now, she's an adult today. I am sure she's all grown up, but she is the young girl that holds this Israeli flag that donned our brochure for many years. And it was because of this situation in Argentina and their desperate situation that she's most remembered for. The fact that we were able to get them out and get them home to Argentina. Get them home to Israel and get them out of their situation in Argentina. So this was unique, but it was again a situation that we were equipped to help with. So today's demand is now potentially exceeding this situation that we saw in the early 2000s. In 2002, as I told you, almost 6,000 Jewish people left. Today, we read an article recently in an Argentine newspaper saying that as many as 8,000 Jewish people have applied to make Aliyah. So the spike that is on its way needs our help, and it needs your help. We're going to be working very diligently, it seems, here in Argentina, and real soon. So how can you pray for us? Pray for these cities that we're working in, Buenos Aires, and there is a large, strong Jewish community in Cordoba and Rosario. We're going to need to set up teams as successful teams in these areas, and you can pray for that. Pray for our representatives that are there today, Guillermo and Mariela, who are a couple working in Buenos Aires. They need your prayers for protection and wisdom as they work and navigate through this surge of Aliyah. Pray for organizations, Christian and Jewish alike, that were able to help Jewish people home. And pray for the churches in the region, that they would capture the vision and get behind that vision and know how to help us with their volunteers. Remember, Isaiah 49:22 says, the Gentiles will carry my sons in their arms, my daughters on their shoulders, speaking of the Jewish people. The Gentile churches need to get behind the work that we're doing in Argentina, and you as well in my audience today. Because God says, I will plant them in the land and no longer pull them up from the land that I have given them. This return, that's Amos 9:15, this return from Argentina and this return from all over the world is the final return. And God will leave them in their land and they will never be plucked up again. So remember, we have resources for you to learn more about this. I'm running out of time, so we're going to quickly just point out Barry Wagner's book, And Still They Come. Pat Frame's book on intercession is in our store, and our small group study on Aliyah is available at our store, and you can go to ezrainternational.org, find those resources, and find out how you can give to help in this work and become part of God's great plan to restore the Jewish people back to the land of Israel, to their biblical destiny, fulfilling his promise he made to Abraham 4,000 years ago. God bless you. Thank you for joining me again. I hope to see you real soon.